everybody, and I'm just pulling up our slides here for you all. So if you could give me a thumbs up if you see it, just so I make sure we're all seeing the same thing. Awesome. Okay. Well, wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share this time with you all. I have to tell you that we haven't even started yet, but I did a lot of research and reflecting and self-care as I prepared for this conversation. And I already feel a little bit reinvigorated just by going through that process. So my hope is that you'll leave today with some strategies that you can use to support yourself, as well as support your team in thinking about the concept of burnout. But before we jump in, I want to start by sharing with those of you who I haven't had the privilege of meeting yet, albeit I recognize quite a few faces in the crowd. So it's wonderful to see those of you again who I've seen previously. But I wanted to start first by reminding you all that I am a big believer in meaningful professional development. My biggest pet peeve in the entire world is sitting in a training event where you can't see the value for your specific practice, your specific situation, and you're listening to somebody sort of monologue at you about things that feel useless. And I want you to know that this is your time, your professional development experience. And I am really passionate about taking this in whatever direction you want to take it in. So please don't hesitate to, message me in the chat. I am absolutely fine with people jumping in, turning off their mute and commenting if there's something you'd like to say. I really want this to be meaningful. So if there's something that sparks your interest, let's talk about it more. And if there's something that, feels a little bit like, oh yeah, I know that already, let's move on. Tell me that too, so that I can adjust accordingly. All right. Does that sound like a good plan? And Megan, I'm going to ask for your help. I'm going to do my best to monitor the chat, but multitasking is always fun. So if I miss something in the chat, just shout out to me because I want to.
You got it. Christine and I can be on chat and let you know.
Perfect. Wonderful. All right. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And I'm actually going to start with a personal story. So for those of you who can see, let me just move this so I can see it myself. So for those of you who know me, you may recognize my face right there. So that's me. That's me in a news article. That is an apartment, and that is me doing what was a developmental play group for children with severe multiple disabilities on Zoom, which, as I'm sure many of you can imagine, was really fun. And this was written May 16th, 2020. And to give you some life details of mine, it was a particularly challenging time. I had actually just come back to my school district. I had a double knee surgery. I had just been diagnosed with albeit totally benign and harmless, but really, really painful tumor condition in my knee. So my health was just not spectacular. And if you remember back to March 2020, the only thing you could do for fun in the entire world was go for a walk. And I couldn't go for a walk. It was very frustrating. So I kind of, I was having this experience of just not being in my best personal state, not being able to access my normal outlets for coping strategies. And then on top of that, I really couldn't do very much in the world. And the things that people typically do in the world in the middle of the pandemic were things I could not do. And then I had that beautiful computer right there, which, by the way, I believe it was the space bar fell off of in like April 2020. But because all the schools were closed, I couldn't get into the actual building to get a new computer with a space bar. So typing emails that way was really exciting for several months. And, it was this process of trying to engage students who had really significant learning deficits through a modality that I had never used before. And I landed myself in the newspaper, which was, don't get me wrong, one of the most exciting experiences, right? To be able to be featured in a newspaper and share that article with all my friends and family. It was exciting. But I reflect back on this, and I reflect back on the smile on my face in that picture. And it feels hard, right? I'm going to be truthful with you all. That's a staged picture right there. There's no kid on the other end of that computer. That's actually just a picture they asked me to take for the newspaper. And I look back at this and I think about how stuck I was in my own cycle of burnout and how I had lost sense of the reason why I was doing what I was doing. And all of the other stressors that were impacting my life were at the forefront of my mind virtually all day, every day. And that was starting to have a really big impact on my professional career and my well-being outside of the workday. So I tried to do some things about it. This is my timeline, my personal burnout timeline. So, I think it's important to recognize that there were some risk factors. I was a brand new BCBA, so I am a board certified behavior analyst. I was actually a special education teacher in my first career, but I was brand new. Like, we're talking 0 days of experience, right? I had dipped my toes into some in-home care, but really no experience, right? I was venturing into a new career path. I went into a really large city school district and I had 11 schools on my caseload, which is big, right? And particularly big for someone who's never done the job before. And so that put me in a place where I was kind of at risk for burnout. And then there were some more risk factors that arose over time. So there was a ton of turnover in leadership. I think in the time that I spent in this role, I had, upwards of 10 different supervisors. And so every time I felt like I had just gotten a sense of what my pathway was and what my roles and responsibilities were, they changed. And then add to that a global pandemic, right? All of those things together really put me personally at risk for burnout. And I went about this journey and I tried to make some personal attempts to mitigate that. I implemented all kinds of practices. Anybody here use Headspace? Remember they came out with that free subscription for Headspace, the mindfulness app during the pandemic. I started using that on a daily basis. I had never run a mile in my entire life, and I learned how to use a treadmill. I put in place all of these strategies to attempt to change my pathway to burnout. And in reflecting upon this, what I realized was, I could try as hard as I could, but at the end of the day, there needed to be some systematic changes that I made, or that the system made, to prevent burnout from happening. Otherwise, all I was doing was making these futile attempts to delay the inevitable. And as such, it was horribly sad. It was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I eventually resigned from that position. It was a gut-wrenching decision, right? Because when I tell you that I cared so deeply about my team members and the children and the families that I was leaving behind in making that decision, but I knew that I couldn't be my best self in that current state. And so then I actually went on to open my own private practice where preventing burnout was the focus of what I did. And I totally invested myself and the practices that I've established here in ensuring that I developed a place where people could leave if they wanted to, but they never wanted to, right? Because we've created a company culture where people want to stay. And sadly, in the role that I used to have, the cycle just continued, right? Another BCBA was onboarded to take over my position, brand new, right out of school, with zero experience, and she took over those 11 schools in the middle of a variety of different risk factors. And so what I'm going to challenge us to do today is to think critically about the changes we need to make on a variety of different levels, on a personal level, on a systems level, to prevent burnout for ourselves and for the people that we support, because both are important. And I'm sure you've heard this slogan before, but you can't pour from an empty cup. Now, in keeping with theme, I want to share with you one of the strategies that I've personally been using over the past couple of years since I started my personal journey to preventing burnout. And there was a period of time in my life when the very first thing I did every morning, I would wake up and the very first thing I did was check my email. And man, was that a horrible habit. If anybody here is doing that right now, your goal number one is to not check your email when you wake up tomorrow morning before you do something for yourself. And that was my bad habit. So I've worked really, really hard to change my bad habits. And one of the things that I've tried to replace checking my email at 6 a.m. with is a gratitude practice. And I thought that in the spirit of kind of starting this new journey and thinking about burnout in a critical way, we should start our discussion with a gratitude practice. So if you guys don't mind, in the chat box, everybody go ahead and type to me 5 little things you feel grateful for that have happened in the last 24 hours. A couple important thoughts there. I'm looking for the little things. I'm looking for your delicious cup of coffee that you had this morning. I'm looking for the silly thing that a child did in your classroom today that made you laugh. I'm not looking for the big moments, right? It's really easy to sit down on Thanksgiving and reflect on those big moments. What's harder is when you're in the midst of the day-to-day grind, finding the little things that give you joy. So go ahead, everybody, type to me, and I'm going to call out things as I see them. Type to me 5 really little things that happened in the last 24 hours that you feel grateful for. And while you guys do that, I'm going to share the 5 that I wrote down this morning. So coffee was definitely one of mine. The snow was gorgeous, albeit if anybody here is from Connecticut, we had snow and it was beautiful. And I woke up to just the glistening trees, and that was amazing. I've got my morning latte. Morning lattes are always good. Positive parent comment. Able to get Kylie corn chowder. Daughter's stomach bug is gone. Woohoo! That's a big one. Just waking up to start your day. No COVID cases. A hug from a grandchild, no traffic, that is a win. Snuggling with your cat. Your car started, that's a definite win too. Favorite song on the way to work. Great dinner. A card from a teacher. Dunkin' Donuts coffee. Puppy snuggles. Awesome, you guys. Thank you for sharing. It's hearing from an old friend. I'm seeing a coffee theme. We must all need a lot of caffeine in our lives. Awesome. Day off today, lazy morning, hugs from children, smiling toddlers. I love it. Rain, not snow. These are wonderful things. Morning text from my boss. So you guys can keep reading these in the chat, but I think it's such a powerful moment, especially with us, so many of us on here, to pause for a second and think about even when life feels hard, even when work feels hard, even when you're in the midst of your own burnout journey, right? There are things to be grateful for. And sometimes just pausing on a regular basis to reflect on those things can shift your mindset, even if, albeit briefly. I think that it's an important practice for us to take a moment and pause to reflect on. So keep those coming. If you think of others, this one's one of my favorites. My college kids all sent me a heart emoji. That's a really good one. All right, so we're gonna kind of move in a different direction now. So the first thing I want to talk to you guys about that I touched upon briefly when I was highlighting for you all my own personal timeline is risk factors. Okay, so the reason we're talking about risk factors is there are certain circumstances, if you will, certain circumstances that increase the likelihood that either yourself or a team member that you support is more likely to experience burnout. And there's a whole bunch of research that has been done on this topic. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that if any of these match your current circumstances that you're in trouble, right? Doesn't mean you're destined for a lifetime of burnout. That's not at all what I'm trying to say. All I mean to suggest through this conversation is that there are certain things that make it more likely that if the conditions in your workplace and your personal practices aren't where they need to be, that you're going to have a hard time. And so just being aware of that is helpful because it indicates to you that perhaps you need to work extra hard to put some positive practices in place and create support systems within your work environment to decrease the likelihood that you're going to end up in a burnout position. So the research indicates that employees who are single or divorced tend to have a higher likelihood of experiencing burnout. I can tell you, I think back to those days where I was doing the online dating spiel, and man, was I burnt out, right? When all you want to do is come home and tell somebody else what a horrible day you had, and there's nobody there. Then you're talking to your cat and your cat's not answering you, right? That's a hard position to be in. Been there, done that. Younger employees, and I think that potentially has something to do with the fact that they don't have well-developed support systems. They lack experience, right? So I remember back to my first year of teaching, conversations that I had with parents that now I'd be like, oh my gosh, that wasn't even on my radar. But in my first year of teaching, they brought tears to my eyes because I just was so new to the world of navigating some of those hard moments with parents. Employees who define work as their single sense of satisfaction, right? So if work is the only thing that brings you pride in your life or brings you joy in your life, and it's not going well, that's going to be hard. Individuals who have limited social support systems, those of us who work long or really atypical hours, and then this one really stinks, you guys, because I'm pretty sure it's all of us on the Zoom call right now, but helping professions, people who are in the business of helping other people are statistically more likely to experience burnout than those individuals who are in other professions. So take a moment, just reflect upon these things and give some thought. Do any of these relate to me? Are any of these things that I should be thinking critically about and are an indicator that I might need to make some changes in my own personal life, as well as the support systems I have in place in the workplace? And then furthermore, reflect upon the team that you guys are responsible for. Do any of these circumstances remind you of a particular person? Someone that you should be kind of looking out for and thinking about how you can do better to help them be more successful in their workplace experience. Okay, and again, you guys jump out at me with any comments or questions you have as we're going. How we doing? Are we all good so far? Okay, I'm seeing some nods, so I'm going to keep going, but I'm here if you have questions or thoughts. All right, so we've covered the risk factors. We've talked about what makes it more likely that burnout is going to be a problem in our lives. Now we have to learn how to recognize the signs of burnout. Okay? Because if we can recognize it early in ourselves or in other people, we're more likely to be able to change it. If you wait until you're taking a fake picture for the newspaper with a big smile on your face, doing telehealth in the middle of a pandemic, it's going to be really hard to fix it, right? But if I had noticed 3 months earlier that burnout was starting to happen, and I had changed some things about the way my world was working, perhaps I would have been able to fix it. So early intervention, just like it's important for our kids, is important for us as adults too. And I'm sure you guys can think of a few different signs of burnout, but first we're going to talk about recognizing signs of burnout in our staff. So I've listed a few here, but go ahead. If you see others, type them out in the chat to me. If there's others that you're noticing in your personal staff, in your team, because I think that that's important for us to discuss. So in my experience, when your team starts showing up late to work and they're consistently tardy, that's a warning sign. That shows that people are trying to escape or avoid being in the workplace, right? So that is definitely something. And if you miss that one, you might start to notice the next one, which is absenteeism. Anybody here, you can raise a virtual hand to me, at me if you can figure out how to use your little emojis on your Zoom screen. Anybody here struggle to cover absent staff? Oh yeah, I'm seeing like people are mouthing, oh yeah, at me. Yeah, so that's a sign of burnout, right? If all your people are calling out on a consistent basis and you can't fill the positions or cover the positions, you probably have a burnout problem happening. People might be particularly sensitive to feedback. Okay. So you try to give them some feedback that on a good day they tech well, and all of a sudden they're completely combative and you just gave them the worst news of their life. Right. And it wasn't even that big of a deal. Like, it was a little tiny thing like, hey, do you mind cleaning the microwave after you heat up your lunch? Right. Those little tiny things. And all of a sudden it feels like a really big problem. Decreased productivity, things that shouldn't be taking that long are taking a really long time because people are engaging in a higher rate of avoidance behaviors. Sometimes you even see emergence of physical systems. Oh boy, coffee. Where's that coffee we were talking about, you guys? Physical symptoms. I know when I was really in a hard place with this in my own journey, I had never struggled with anxiety in my entire life. I had been extraordinarily blessed that was just something I really hadn't experienced. And I developed debilitating anxiety, the kind of anxiety that would keep me up at night, that started to have a really physical toll on my body. I'm pretty sure, I don't know if this is really possible because the doctors tell me it's not, but I'm pretty sure I had stress-induced shingles, okay, at one point, because I was that anxious and stressed because of my job. So physical symptoms may come up, irritability, cynicism. I see that one all the time, right? So you get that snarky remark in response to everything you say. And then when people are burnt out, they start to make mistakes and you start to notice errors in some of their tasks. So Joanne, thank you. You're throwing a few out there at me. I'm going to read them out loud, but you guys, if you have others that you're noticing in your team, I think it would be helpful if we share those, because there may be things that I haven't thought of here that you guys are reflecting on that would be helpful for your colleagues. So Joanne is noticing an inability to do daily tasks, being out of uniform. Oh, that's a good one. I hadn't thought of that one. Too tired, not doing their laundry. Yes, those are great ones. Any others that anybody wants to share? Losing patience. Yeah, particularly with our kiddos, right? Right. When staff start to get frustrated with babies, there's a problem. The COVID scares creating tardiness. Yep, definitely. Yeah, it's really interesting to me how, certainly right now we're in a unique state where it seems like everybody, has COVID, right? And then there's these moments where I wonder, does everybody have COVID, or are half the people home because they're burnt out and they've been exposed, and it's a good way to take a day off, right? And certainly I think that the transmission rate is so high right now that people are genuinely afraid. But I also think there's this element of people are burnt out too. And when you're the one person who shows up to work and the 5 other people didn't come, guess who feels particularly burnt out tomorrow and is less likely to come in to do that again, right? Emotions all over the place, totally. I feel like I cried in front of large crowds of people on like a weekly basis when I was going through that. It was very mortifying, for the record. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing. All right. So yeah, the idea being that we need to be on the lookout for these things in our staff, because if we recognize that these things are happening, we should be then trying to make some changes. But here's the second piece of the puzzle. You can't pour from an empty cup, as we've discussed before, and you can't help people before you help yourselves, right? So actually, this is a fun question. So I'm going to ask a question. You can type to me in the chat what you think the answer is. So you're getting on an airplane, right? And let's hope this never happens to anybody, but all of a sudden emergency lights keep flashing, right? And they tell you to put on your oxygen mask. But you're with your 3-year-old child, who there's absolutely no world in which that child is going to be able to put on their own oxygen mask. So as a parent, what do? Do you put the oxygen mask on your child first, or do you put it on yourself first? So go ahead in the chat and let me know. What do you think? Okay, so we've got 1 for put on your own, child. Take care of them, even though it's supposed to be yourself, child, me first, so I can help your child. Okay, so you see the themes. So the answer is, according to the airline industry, yourself. And the reason for that is, if that air cabin has no oxygen in it, so it's an indicator that you need oxygen, you are going to pass out while you're trying to put the mask on your child. Okay. And you're going to be unconscious. And then if you're lucky, you got it close enough to your kid where they were able to put it on their face. But then your child is on an airplane in distress with an unconscious parent next to them, right? Or perhaps you didn't even make it that far and you didn't get it on your kiddo. And so now you're both out for the count. And it's a horrible example. It's horrible to even think about. But the reason they tell you to put it on yourself first is that if you're incapacitated, you can't help your kid, right? But if you put the oxygen on yourself first, you're golden. And then you're going to be able to move really quickly to get it on your kid in time too. And you're both going to be okay. And your child's not going to be left alone to navigate that crisis independently, which is sort of counterintuitive, right? It's sort of surprising. It's not our instinct as caretakers, as parents, as teachers to take care of ourselves before we take care of other people. And that's why you're all in this profession, because we want to take care of other people. But the reality of the situation is you can't do that unless you're taking care of yourself. So getting away from airplane disasters and going back to the concept of burnout, here's a list of questions. It's actually from a healthcare website about how to identify burnout in yourself. Okay, so have you personally become cynical at work? And I'm not going to make you raise your hands to these questions, but do take some time to think about yes or no, okay? Do you ever have to drag yourself to work and then have some trouble getting started? Anybody ever been irritable or impatient with your coworkers or your clients? Lacking energy to be consistently productive, having a hard time concentrating? How about this one? You accomplish things, but you don't feel satisfaction from that. You start to feel disillusioned about your job and using food, drugs, alcohol to simply feel better or just not feel it at all. Changing sleep habits. That was a big one for me. I just stopped sleeping. And then other things, unexplained headaches, stomach problems, physical complaints. And this is not an all exhaustive list, you guys. This is just common signs of burnout. But if you are feeling any of these things, if you said yes to any of these questions, I really want to challenge you to value yourself enough to make some changes. Because if you don't do that, you're not going to be able to help the people that got you into this profession in the first place. Okay. So now we need to think about the consequences of burnout. So we've talked a little bit about what makes it likely that you're going to have burnout. And we've talked about how to figure out if you're starting to have burnout. But why are we even having this discussion, right? Burnout happens everywhere. There was an article, I can't remember if it was the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, but there was a really interesting article about the Great Resignation that's happening right now and how virtually everybody seems to be experiencing burnout and virtually everybody seems to be resigning from their job. So it kind of got me thinking, well, why do we care, right? Why do we care? There are a lot of reasons to try to avoid burnout, you guys. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but excessive stress, oh my gosh, that's the worst thing in the world. We do not, if you experience chronic burnout, you are going to experience chronic stress. And that will lead to fatigue, insomnia, sadness, anger. It could cause alcohol or substance misuse. There have actually been studies that show if you are exposed to prolonged burnout for a sustained period of time, you could get heart disease. You have a higher likelihood of getting high blood pressure, type 2 diabetes, and being particularly vulnerable to illness, which newsflash, you guys, is a really bad thing to have happen in the middle of a global pandemic, right? Really not ideal. So we have a personal motivation to avoid burnout because there's absolutely no world in which I want any of these things happening to me myself, right? But then there's also the impact on your organization. So if your staff are experiencing prolonged burnout, your organization is going to experience absenteeism. And we've already touched on this a little bit already. But when you have absenteeism, and then you're trying to cover staff in the middle of the Great Resignation, oftentimes you're left unable to provide the services that the company is supposed to be providing, right? And when you can't provide services, you can't generate revenue. And when you can't generate revenue, the company fails. And then the company has less money to be able to put into resources that they need to prevent burnout from happening. So that's a big problem. Turnover is a huge issue. Anybody have staff quit this year so far? Anybody have that? If I've seen a few nodding heads, yeah. And that's insanely frustrating, right? Because I can say we're a very small company and we're relatively new. So I'm fortunate that I haven't had anybody quit yet in the year that we've existed. But I have tried to hire new people. And it is on average taking me 2 months to find one qualified employee. And that is insane. Because if somebody gives me 2 weeks notice someday that they're leaving this position and it takes me 2 months to find somebody who's qualified to take over their job, I am in deep trouble for a month and a half, right? And that creates a whole host of other issues where you're pulling upon the staff who did show up to work, who are also probably starting to feel burnt out, to cover those positions and increasing the likelihood of future turnover. I already touched on service disruption, but if you've got burnout, you've got service disruption, or at minimum, poor performance, right? At a minimum, you've got that. We said this already, but we got that staff member who's really, really frustrated with a little tiny infant. Yep. And that does not go over well with parents, right? And it impacts companies' performance. And then we mentioned this one, the stress on the covering employees. So there is a huge impact on the organization when burnout is happening. And that is in and of itself, in addition to the burnout impact on individuals from a health perspective, it's a reason why we need to intervene. So I have a question. It's another chat thing. So get your keyboards out, guys. But I'm wondering if you guys could highlight for me, reflect upon, your own work experiences, your own organizations, your own team, your own self. Why do staff experience burnout? What are some of the things that are causing burnout in the realm that you're working in? And I will read them out loud to you guys as I see them come through. Being short-staffed. Yep, certain teachers being pulled out and others refuse. Long hours with no breaks, no coverage, lack of staff, late shifts. Yeah, tonight I'm running a young adult meetup, which I'm super excited about, but it's late. And I'll tell you, on these days where I go from like 6 a.m. to 8 p.m., I'm like, oh my God, talk about burnout, right? Lack of support, feeling a lack of support. Yep. Meeting teachers, no coverage breaks, staff getting overworked. Absolutely. I'm seeing big themes related to staff shortages. Personal issues. That's a really good one, Wendy. Yes. Personal issues in their own lives. Covering for all the people who call out. Change. Yes. All the changes. Change is hard. It's really, really hard. Working 7 days a week due to COVID exposures. Lack of alignment with the organization, absolutely. When your mission differs from the mission of the company that you're supporting. Fear of COVID, what could possibly happen next? Working 24 hours. Yes. Admin are so busy and can't offer as much support. Totally, you guys. Awesome. Parent expectations, I hear that one a lot too. Great. This is a really helpful list. And I hope it's getting your minds kind of going, thinking about some of the variables that we might want to think about changing, right? The why behind burnout is incredibly important to understand. If we don't understand the why, we can't fix it. And the why is going to be different for you and your team and your organization than it may be for others. So that's important to be thinking about from an individual perspective. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about assessing the situation. But before I do that, I'm going to pause, check in with everybody. We still doing okay? I hope nobody's bored out of their mind. Everybody's finding it meaningful so far. You'll tell me if you're not, right? Okay, cool. All right, so we're going to talk about assessing the situation, okay? So you have at this point recognized that there's a likelihood that yourself or your team may experience burnout. And I'm moving your faces out of the way, so I apologize that I keep moving this thing all over the screen. But you've recognized that. And then you've started to notice some symptoms of burnout. And you've done some reflecting on why. But now we have to dive deep and deeply understand the situation. The idea in this phase is that we should be using data to determine the intensity of the burnout problem. If the intensity of the burnout problem is really, really mild, may not require that many fixes to move in the right direction. But if the intensity is huge and overwhelming and dominating the workplace culture throughout your organization, that's a big deal. And it might require a lot more in terms of interventions to change that pattern. So we want to use some data to get a sense of where we're at. And there's a few different key indicators that I would suggest we think about when trying to analyze the intensity of our burnout problems within our organizations. One great one, absenteeism, right? Literally, what % of your staff are absent every day? If it's 2%, maybe that's okay, depending on the size of your organization. If it's 85%, I hope it's not, but if it is, you're in trouble. You got a really big problem, right? And my guess is you fall somewhere in between those numbers. But thinking about magnitude there is important, as well as turnover rates. Are you holding on to your people? If you're not holding on to people and people are leaving, there's probably a burnout problem. And if people are leaving frequently, there's probably a really big burnout problem. If people are staying for a relatively long duration of time, maybe not. And then job performance trends. So if you have metrics that you use for performance evaluations, and you are noticing that across a substantial number of your employees, there is a declining trend in performance over time, that could be a sign of burnout. There's also some really cool tools. So as I was doing research for this presentation, there's some incredible tools out there that are literally staff assessments that measure burnout and work-life balance among staff. I am so excited. They're not even that expensive. Some of them are like $15 and they're so informative. So I actually am really excited. I'm hoping to purchase some of these to use with our own team here. But having staff complete those assessments might be a way to gain some of this information. So here are the two different tools that I found that I think might be particularly relevant. And again, they're not super expensive. So give some thought to ways that you're to potentially exploring these. The first one here is the MASLAC, I think I'm saying that correctly, Burnout Inventory. And that's a survey, if you will, that measures feelings of emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and personal accomplishment. And so you can literally give your staff this survey and see what they rate, see what scores they get. There's also the areas of work-life survey, which really complements the first inventory I touched on. It measures workload, it measures your employee's sense of control over their work environment and other factors. But the global theme I want you to take away from this is that these types of values questionnaires can be really, really useful in helping you understand what's important to the individuals you work with, right? You may have a team that doesn't mind having a big workload. They're there to work hard. But guess what? They're there to work hard and live well. So if they have a huge workload, but they don't have good work-life balance, so those moments when they are not at work are dominated by work-related things, that could be something that impacts their burnout rate, right? Or you may have another team where that's not at all the problem. The problem is personal accomplishments, right? And not being recognized for personal accomplishments. So using these tools can help guide you in the right direction. Okay. So with that being said, now we're going to move into what do you do? So we've talked a lot about all the negative stuff, right? The risk factors, the signs that it's coming, all the horrible things it's going to do to your mental health and your body, how it's going to ruin your organization. Let's move on to what can we do to fix it? So now that you understand the why, you've taken a deep dive into the data, you've done some of these assessments, what do we do next? Well, we roll out interventions and support. Now, I have a very important piece of news to share with you all, and we touched on it already with the airplane conversation. And we touched on it already when I said you can't pour from an empty cup. But get this, you guys. According to a Harvard research study, 7% of employees believe that stressed leaders effectively lead their teams. You guys, that means 93% of employees feel like if their boss is stressed, they're really not good leaders. And that is concerning because if you're a leader, raise your hand if you are a leader who is stressed. Some of us are stressed. 93% of the people who work for us, if they know we are stressed, don't believe we can do our jobs effectively. And that's concerning. 11% of employees with stressed leaders are highly engaged at work. So let me do math in my head. I think that means that 89, did I do math right? Oh, baby, that coffee needs to kick in. 89% of our employees are disengaged at work when their leader is stressed out. And then 50% of employees with these types of leaders who are stressed think that their leaders are harmful and ineffective. So as we go through this conversation, we're going to talk about supporting your people because that's important, right? Your leaders. And so leaders have to support their people. But we're also going to talk about supporting yourself because there's no world in which you can do that without supporting yourself first. Okay, so for each of these interventions, we're going to touch on both how you apply it to team, but also how you apply it to yourself. So and these are all evidence-based, you guys. So there is a ton of research backing these interventions, okay? And the first one that I want to touch on is the concept of peer mentoring. So peer mentoring is a system, as I'm sure you're all familiar, where you have a mentor and a mentee relationship between colleagues. So this is really easy to set up with your team, right? Your step one, just send out an email to your team and ask who's interested in being a mentor. Because once you've identified those mentors, guess who you go to next? The people who have signs of burnout, the people who are young and are just starting, right? The people who have high risk factors. And you say, hey, by the way, we're starting a mentorship program. We have some mentors who volunteered their time to participate in this. Would you like to be in a mentor-mentee relationship? And then from there, the mentors would check in with their mentees weekly via phone, text messages, just to see how people are doing. How nice is it to have the opportunity to have someone who gets it, right? They're there with you. They're experiencing all the same things you are, and they're just there to listen. But here's the important part, you guys. It's not just about listening. It's about creating a relationship in which mentors have an obligation to get feedback and pass that on to leadership, right? So if you guys are the leaders and then you establish a pool of mentors who work underneath you, and they have developed trusting relationships with mentees, and they're gathering feedback about what some of those stressors are, what are those causes of burnout, and they're bringing it to you, you can make change, right? And one practice I love for this is that as part of that weekly mentorship conversation, the employees should rate the week on a scale of 1 to 5. Was your week really great or was it really not so great, right? And that's a form of data. So if you're seeing trends where weeks are starting to be rated better and better and better over time, that's a good thing. But if you're seeing something move in the opposite direction, that's a problem. All right, but we're going to bring it home, you guys. How do you do this yourself, right? Because you can't really, if you're the boss, if you're the leader, it's going to be hard to put yourself in the same mentorship circle as all of your employees because that just creates weird dynamics, right? People aren't always as comfortable sharing when their boss or their supervisor is present. But that's okay. You can still use this in your own life. So we would suggest finding a mentor of your own. You might find a mentor who's a senior employee or a colleague in the field who doesn't necessarily work at your company, but is in a similar space and can relate to what you're going through. Schedule weekly meetings with your mentor and do not plan over them. If you are like me, you've gone ahead and you've put time on your calendar to do things that bring you joy. And then you get that meeting that you just can't fit in anywhere else. And what do you schedule over, right? So don't schedule over them. Hold that time as sacred, even if it's 15 minutes a week to connect with your mentor. In those mentorship meetings, I think it's really important to hold yourself accountable to consistently celebrate one thing that went well and consistently talk about one thing that was frustrating. I actually do this with my co-founder. So we meet on a weekly basis. And the expectation is that you will show up with one thing that was successful and one thing that really irritated you, so that you create a culture in which giving feedback and receiving feedback is an expectation and not something that feels icky or taboo. And lastly, make sure that when you have these mentorship meetings, you're leaving with an action plan. It's easy for these types of conversations to turn into vent fests, as I call them, right? Where it's just sort of like word vomit of all the things that are bothering you. But don't just leave it at that. Establish an action plan. All right, so what am I going to do in the next week to try to make this better, so that you can then revisit that in a week's time and think about whether that was successful or if you need to do something differently. Okay, roundtable. So roundtable, similar to the mentorship experience, but a little bit different. So a roundtable would be hosted on a regular basis, and it's basically a safe place where people can discuss work issues, celebrate successes with their peers without violating confidentiality of children. I think it's really challenging that we expect our staff to, and ourselves, but to not talk about our kids outside of work, right? Because we all know that the cutest thing happened on Monday and we just want to share it with the world, but there's this expectation where you're not allowed to break client confidentiality, or something really obnoxious happened with a child and you want to share it with the world and you can't do that either, right? But we need a place to share those stories. So roundtables give us a safe space to do that, where you're not impacting confidentiality concerns and you're creating an outlet for people to share moments of success, but then also things that were hard. I would recommend having a senior employee serve as the host of these roundtables, and definitely schedule these meetings before the day starts or at the end of the day to make attendance convenient for staff. Sometimes when you schedule these types of things in the middle of the day, Joe Schmo's meeting ran late and they don't make it on time. And so doing it as the very first or the very last thing in the day tends to help it be more successful in terms of attendance. You might even consider requiring attendance as a term of employment, or compensating your table leaders for their time. And we all recognize budgets are tight, right? So compensation doesn't need to be monetary compensation. People thrive off things like, hey, you get free breakfast if you're a roundtable host, things of that nature. All right. Bringing it home again, you guys. We can do leadership roundtables as well. These are a blast. I've gotten to do a few of them myself, but they're really fun. You use the time to problem solve issues, and then also celebrate those wins, and come up with an action plan. So there's quite a few of you here on the screen today, and I think that while your team might benefit from roundtable discussions, it may also be beneficial to find a few people who are on the screen here today who are in your general vicinity or your general area that you could have roundtables with on a regular basis and provide an avenue for people to have those conversations. All right, I'm going to pause here. Anybody ever do any of these two different types of programs, mentorship, roundtables? If you have, did you like them? Any recommendations or tips for people in terms of bringing those to their own practices? If not, that's okay too, but I'm going to do a quick check-in here to see if anybody's used any of these, benefited from any of these, or has ideas for how to improve upon anything I've shared thus far. Give it a quick second. Done both, love them. Mentorship is fantastic. Awesome. Good, good, good. Great. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear it. Oh, another one. I have a mentor at my center, done mentoring myself, brought it here, works well. Just have to find coverage for teams to meet. Totally. Totally. And again, this may not be a possibility within the constraints that you're working, but something to keep in mind is that if you run this as a compensation program, right? So people can earn a stipend of some kind for being a mentor, then you have the ability to do it on your own time, which can sometimes help with the coverage issue. But again, that depends on budgets. Love the idea of teachers mentoring each other, want to figure out how to logistically make it happen. Mentorship works well for new employees, totally, especially because those new employees are the ones who are at higher risk for burnout, right? Roundtable for interns. It was very helpful for them to chat and problem solve. Oh, I love that idea. I hadn't thought about doing it for interns before. Awesome. All right, you guys. So I'm going to keep going here, but if you have thoughts, shout them out to me. All right. So staff training, and look, we're here today. So how exciting is that, right? But yeah, staff training is an evidence-based intervention for preventing burnout. Because when staff feel more successful at their jobs, they're less likely to burn out. So consider how you can do monthly educational events to train your staff on job-specific skills, as well as other things, right? So sometimes we focus largely on the educational component of this and getting our teachers, all the techniques and strategies they need to be successful in the direct implementation of the service with the children. But then we forget other things like CPR and mandated reporter, right? And I don't know, restrained seclusion, depending on your setting, crisis procedures. There's all different kinds of things, but there's this idea that we need training on job specific skills and techniques, but there's also other stuff we need training on too. I would also suggest, and this is really, really, really hard. So I recognize that this can take time and systematic change to get to this place. But sometimes we get in a habit where we schedule a training for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, right? And we train to this preset duration of time, but we don't train to mastery, right? So some of us are going to take this burnout content, go to work tomorrow and implement it and get it like that. And others of us may need a bit more practice. And the same thing holds for our employees. So if you're teaching your staff some kind of new teaching practice, I don't know, or a new curriculum, some of our staff are going to get it in 30 minutes. Some of them are going to take 30 days, right? And it's because people come to the table with different levels of experience and knowledge, they're going to require different amounts of training. So instead of just training people to the amount of time that we've preset, we should be training people to mastery. Using evidence-based practices like behavioral skills training and one-on-one behavioral coaching, which I'm happy to provide additional resources on for you guys. I don't believe, I may go into this later in the presentation, but behavioral skills training is tell people what you want them to do, model it for them, role play it for them, and give them feedback, okay? Okay, now what about us, right? We are also at risk for burnout. So on-site continuing education opportunities are a huge deal because they help prevent us from burning out. Continuing education stipends are great if we're able to find ways to use those to help improve morale and performance. And then setting professional goals for ourselves, right? So perhaps there's something new that you want training in. So set a professional goal for it. Go out and pursue those professional development opportunities, because doing so is going to make you more successful at your job, and it's going to help you feel more fulfilled as time goes on. Here's a fun question for you guys. I'm going to go back because I always like to hear the answer to this one. In the chat, go ahead and share with me, I should say, one professional development experience you had, one topic that you got training in that lit your soul on fire. You remember it to this day. It was meaningful. You went to work the next day super inspired, ready to tackle anything that was thrown your way. I'm hopeful that you've invested some time in finding opportunities for yourself. It could be a class you took. It could be a conversation you had, but what's one professional development experience you've had that really made you passionate again and kind of countered some of the burnout effects you were experiencing? Effective communication. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Mentor program that you were in many moons ago and it sticks with you each day. That's a great one. Great one. Any others? No? Okay. Perfect. Well, thank you guys for sharing. Yeah. So there's those things and you remember them. Social thinking and leadership cohort at the McCormick Institute, which was a whole year long. Wow. Great bonding, friends, etc. Yeah. I've actually found a couple really, I'm deviating a little bit from the concept of professional development, but really great communities of like-minded professionals on social media, which seems crazy, but there's just some really incredible social media groups, particularly in the world of COVID, where just people who have refreshing ideas and are willing to talk it out with you. And I've met some really cool people through that. So choose love. Oh, that's awesome. Sound structure of English, inclusion class, early intervention test training. Love it. Love it. And I love that you guys are investing time into these things. That's wonderful. So for those of you who haven't had such an experience yet, talk to the people who typed it in the chat and figure out where they did those things so that you can do them too. Okay. Great. So encouraging self-care. That's our next topic. And this is a big one. In maintaining physical, mental, emotional health is important for everybody. But you guys, it is so important for those of us who are working in social services, in helping professions. Okay. Put your personal needs first and schedule time for self-care. As we've already talked about, you cannot help other people before you help yourself. So provide yourself with really simple self-care opportunities in your organization. Some ideas are, I don't know about you guys, but when I'm stressed, invest in a giant bag of candy, which is a very bad coping strategy, right? Because then what do I do all day? I just like ingest a bunch of chocolate. That doesn't make me feel so good, right? But if we can do simple things to afford ourselves the opportunity to have self-care practices, that's really important. So set up a healthy snack station. That's always great. Offering paid time off for a volunteering opportunity. Things like that are really critical and they can be done through the workday, because I think sometimes we get stuck in this pattern of saving self-care for before work or after work, which makes for a really long workday, and embedding it within our schedule makes a really huge difference. My co-founder and I actually have scheduled, and I'm not going to claim to be perfect at this, it's work in progress, but we have actually scheduled a 15-minute walk every day. Sometimes we deviate from our self-care routines and we schedule over it, and we feel it on those days when we do that. But simple things like that make all of the difference. The biggest takeaway point that I want to make here is that if you do not take self-care seriously, you simply cannot expect your employees to do so. You have to walk the talk and model those behaviors for your team. If you don't model those behaviors, all you're teaching other people is that they're expected to behave the same way you're expected. And if you're not taking care of you, they're not going to take care of themselves either. Okay. Perfect. So now bringing it back home. I already talked about this. I couldn't even contain myself, so it came out of my mouth before we even got started, you guys. But if the very first thing you do in the morning is check your email, I want you to think of something you can do different tomorrow morning. And I'm going to keep an eye out from an email from each of you telling me exactly what you did differently. What is the first thing you do in the morning? Go ahead and type that to me in the chat, you guys. What is the very first thing you did this morning? This will be an interesting experiment. The very first thing you did this morning should be something that brought you joy. Hit snooze. Oh my gosh, that's the best thing I ever heard. Hit snooze. Coffee. Love it. Check the weather. Coffee, snooze. I saw a few check phones. I hope you were checking something fun on your phone, not your email. I did see one in there that was check for staff call outs. Womp, womp. Wordle. Okay, Megan, you're after this, you're gonna have to explain to me what Wordle is, because I've seen that all over Facebook the past few days and I have no idea what it is, but it must be fun. Kitty snuggle time. Read the skim. Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so hey, you guys are doing pretty good. I only saw a few work-related things in there. But yeah, challenge yourself to make sure that the first thing you do in the morning is something that brings you joy. And then extend that joy. Schedule it into every day. These are obvious, but I'm going to say them because we're all guilty of forgetting. Move your body for 30 minutes every day. You guys, that doesn't mean you need to run on a treadmill. It doesn't mean you need to go to the gym. It doesn't mean you need to go to yoga class. It does mean you may need to go for a walk. It does mean that you should not sit in your desk for 7 hours straight without standing up. Your body needs to move. Human beings are not built to sit at a desk for an entire day. So you have to get up and move. Otherwise, you're setting yourself up for failure. Drink water. I'm learning something. So sidebar, my own personal woes. So for a long time, I had the regular mask, right? The cloth mask. And then we had a little COVID situation here in the Hangout Spot where my co-founder got COVID. And then it seemed like every single child we worked with had COVID, right? And ironically, like not getting it from each other, they just all came here with COVID and then were quarantined within 24 hours. And I started to get nervous because we're a very small organization. So, you know, that could be really, really detrimental to our families and children if we all get sick at the same time. So I made my husband order N95s from Home Depot and I got them. And you guys, I have a really big problem because so you have to wear the thing all day long, right? I don't drink water when I'm wearing that N95 because it has a stupid rubber band on the back of it that gets tangled in my hair. And it's like such a process to take it on and off. So I forget to drink my water. And I've literally the past week, I've been coming home so thirsty and so grouchy because I'm not doing basic self-care. So conclusion of the story is they need to invent like a camel backpack N95 for me because I'm struggling with this, but it's something I'm actively working on, which is why during my mask break with you all, I have my water bottle out today. So drink water, eat foods that make you feel good. I don't care if chocolate makes you feel good. I don't care if French fries make you feel good, you know, but think about what makes you feel good and what makes you feel not good. And fill your body with the things that make you feel good. Practice gratitude, right? So that I actually do that, write down 5 little things that happened in the last 24 hours. Every single morning when I wake up, that's what I do. I also recommend developing routines. So in moments of chaos, the things that can help you feel grounded are your routines. But if you don't have routines, it's hard to go back to that foundation. And then the last theme here is work hard, live well. So when you are at work, work hard, right? Do the very best job you can. Do everything you can to be successful for yourself, your team, and your children and their families. But live well when you're not at work, right? Establish practices that allow you to kind of take a break and do things that bring you joy. Now, easier said than done, right? So I want to give you some really actionable steps that can help you live well outside of work. Because I can tell you that, and you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, yeah, lady, like sounds great, but how do we actually do that, right? So here's a few different really easy steps that I think you can take to help yourself with these strategies. Set boundaries between work and non-work time. So we actually have programmed on our Outlook calendars that at 6:30 p.m., we have programmed family time. And we have agreements, me and my co-founder do, that we will not contact each other unless it is a dire emergency during that family time block. And I won't say we're perfect at it, right? There are totally times where something crazy happens and it's not really emergency. It could probably wait until 8 a.m. tomorrow, but I'm just eager to share it. And I can't turn off my work brain and we fail and we infringe on each other's family time. But we remind each other and ourselves of that on a regular basis, that we need to have boundaries. Otherwise, when we're here at work together, we're less successful. Things you can do to support your employees with this. So be really careful. If you are a workaholic like I am, you might be sending emails at 5 o'clock in the morning, or 10 o'clock at night, right? But that's not modeling boundaries for your employees. What it's modeling is the lack of boundaries and a motivation, if you will, or a habit perhaps related to kind of deviating from self-care practices. So don't send your employees emails or messages after hours. Save them for the in-hour time. If you start to notice that one of your employees is doing a lot of work at night, check in with them to understand why and try to provide support. So things like I've noticed before, we have our staff do session notes, and I start to notice that people are doing them on their own time. And that's a red flag to me. And I'll often jump in and do a few for them, because that's an indicator to me that burnout is coming. Okay, now for yourselves, actually take time off, you guys. If anybody is sitting there with personal time or vacation time and they are not using it, take time off. Okay. That is critically important. There is a reason why your company gives you those types of benefits. So if you are in the position where you get paid time off or vacation time, use it so that you can come to work after that vacation and feel re-inspired and ready to tackle anything. This one is the best thing that ever happened to me. So I actually got married in November this year. And so as you guys have heard, I founded my own company. It was a startup. I haven't taken a vacation in like 2 years since I did that. And I finally got to go on my honeymoon, and it was the best ever. So I went to Hawaii for 2 weeks. And leading up to Hawaii, I had like panic attack after panic attack after panic attack about, oh my God, I'm going to get 500 emails in 2 weeks. And like, I'm going to come back to this chaos and how stressful. And so then I decided, of course, with my co-founder's permission, to set up email forwarding. So during that period of time when I was away, every single email I got forwarded to my colleague. And she worked extra hard that week, right? Or those 2 weeks. But what was beautiful about it was, you guys, I cheated, right? Work time boundaries. I'm not very good at them. I'm working on them. But I totally cheated, and I went on my work email when I was in Hawaii, and it was like, oh, no new emails. Guess I should go enjoy myself, right? And then on the flip side, she did the same for me. So she took off to Mexico a few weeks later, and I got all of her emails. And it was just such a refreshing experience to set up a boundary for myself that even if I cheated a little, I still wasn't going to be able to access what I wanted to access from work. I also took email off of my phone, because if email is on my phone, I will check it every 15 minutes, even if I know there's no emails in there. So taking that off the phone just eliminates the possible, or at least like makes it less likely that you're going to be constantly checking emails outside of work hours. Keep your relationships professional, and that's not always possible. Some of our best friends are our work family, right? But sometimes it can be hard when your best friends are also your work people, because when you're having friend time, it's still work time, right? You're still talking about work, perseverating on work. And so making sure that you at least have relationships that are deep and meaningful with others as well, so that you don't feel like all of your social time is dominated by workplace conversations. Delegate when appropriate. Not everything can be delegated, but there are definitely things that can be delegated, right? So don't try to do it all. Delegate tasks where you can. And identify your non-negotiables, you guys. Now, recognizing that as leaders, sometimes we have to make sacrifices. Totally have to make sacrifices. One of the things that for me is a non-negotiable are Friday night dinners with my husband, right? So it's okay. I'm totally cool. If I have to work a Saturday to make this company float, I will work a Saturday to make this company float. But I will not schedule over Friday dinners with my husband, because it's one of the only days of the week where we're both available to have time together. Yours might be your child's soccer games, right? Or dance recitals, right? It could be all different things, but it's really important to identify what are those things that are non-negotiable for you, and then hold them sacred. And here's a little trick. Go into your calendar for next week and block out an hour or two of busy time. People won't schedule over your busy time because people seem to be hesitant to do so. And then when that time comes, or let's say you have a meeting that you're having a really hard time fitting it in, you could put it in your busy time, right? But you'll notice that all of a sudden you have a lot more free time. And man, are we more productive when we have an hour straight of free time to get something done. So block out some busy time on your calendar to get that stuff done that you're not getting done at other times of the day. And if you end up with some extra, it's a great time to program in some of that joy. Okay. So our next piece here, personalizing reinforcers. And I'm actually going to kind of cruise through this section because I think you guys, some of you may have seen this before in a previous presentation. But I wanted to remind you all of it. It's really important to personalize how you recognize your employees by giving them choices. So I might love it when someone calls me out and compliments me in front of a large crowd for a personal accomplishment. There are people who hate that, and that's embarrassing, right? People feel valued in different ways. And so it's important to understand the different things that are reinforcing for your team so that you can personalize accordingly. Otherwise, you risk trying really hard to make people feel appreciated in a way that doesn't make them feel appreciated, which is a futile effort and is going to not help them and perhaps make you feel extra exhausted as well. We actually do a survey in interviews, but you could do it when you're onboarding new employees. And we use this survey as an opportunity to gather information about our staff's preferences and what makes them feel valued and appreciated. So that way, from the moment that individual joins our team, we know exactly what they like, what makes them feel part of the team and makes them feel appreciated. And we program those things into our practice. Oh, so here's my quote. Yes. So my quote that I shared with you before, but it's stated much more eloquently here. So Richard Branson said, train people well enough so they can leave. Treat them well enough so they don't want to. Right? That's the essence of what we're talking about here. Okay. So this slide right here, I recognize that we have about 8 minutes remaining. So I'm just going to kind of briefly touch on this, but these are just some things that can happen if employees don't feel valued and appreciated, right? They become discouraged, they have tardiness, you get the grumbling, complaining, gossiping going on. People don't feel connected to the organization, and then you start to get the big impact of turnover, right? So you guys may have seen this in a previous conversation, but I want to remind you of this book. It's my favorite book of all time, The Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. So for those of you familiar with 5 love languages in the workplace, this is, or 5 love languages in general, this takes that kind of concept and applies it to workplace interactions. And so this is actually, and you guys, I'm going to send out these slides so you'll have access to this, but seriously, feel free to screenshot this. I give it to you to replicate and use with your team members. But this is actually the survey we use when we interview people. So the very last question in our interview process is, we want our employees to feel valued and appreciated. What statement best describes what makes you feel appreciated in the workplace? Now, I will tell you, I do make sure to share with people that there's no right or wrong answer to this. And that certainly, if one thing makes them feel appreciated, it's not like we're looking for an employee who values gift giving because that's what we're all about here. That's not the case. I make it clear to them that the reason I'm asking this question is because then I can plan accordingly if they're selected for the position. And so the different languages of appreciation are listed here for you: gift giving, quality time, words of affirmation, acts of service, appropriate touch, which is such a funny one in COVID times and everybody laughs at it, but I put it there because it's from the book, right? But these are the different value styles that you might see amongst employees, and gathering that information is really important. But then you have to do it for yourself. Okay, so you have to recognize what is your own love language in the workplace. And so I'm going to ask you a few questions here. that you don't have to reflect upon right now, but I would encourage you to reflect upon. 5 things your supervisor or your colleagues currently say or do that do make you feel appreciated. And 5 things your supervisors or colleagues say or do right now that make you feel really unappreciated. And my hope for you all is that you'll get to the place, particularly now that we've had this conversation as a group here, where you can communicate those things to each other, right? So my team and I, we're now at the place where we can say, hey, when you tried to rush out of here at the end of the day and I had to empty all the garbages by myself, that made me feel really unappreciated. And people react to that and they respond. And guess what? We fix it so that the next time that doesn't happen. And on the flip side too, hey, when you offered to take that parent phone call for me that I knew I was going to really struggle with, that really made me feel valued and appreciated. Thanks. So we communicate that with our team. And then we deliver our own reinforcers, right? So I totally recognize that people aren't, if my love language is gifts, people aren't going to buy me gifts all the time, right? They might change a little bit because they're aware that that's my love language. But I treat myself to gifts, you guys. I totally, after on a hard day, I stop at Starbucks. We've had a coffee theme here, so I'm going to roll with that. And I get myself a Starbucks because it's my love language. And I have to practice self-love and self-care to be able to help my team and my children and my families. All right, the last thing we have to touch on, you guys, is monitoring progress. So these things are only helpful if they're working. And we've talked about how it's really important to understand the why behind burnout, right? Because each individual or each organization's why is going to be different. And you may not get it perfect the first time, and that's okay, but it's important to recognize whether or not what you're doing is working. Because if it is working, awesome, run with it, do more of it, right? But if it's not working, then we need to stop and we need to think differently and we need to try something else. Otherwise, the efforts are futile. So I definitely recommend continuing to assess that data. Remember, we talked about absenteeism, we talked about turnover rates, we talked about declining trends in performance evaluations. Don't just look at that once and then never look at it again. Be sure that as you're implementing some of these supports and interventions, you're taking a look at that data and seeing how it changed. Repeat those surveys we talked about periodically, right? See if you get improving scores over time. You might also do employee engagement tongue twister surveys to get a better sense of how your employees feel about career development, compensation, relationship management, scheduling, those types of things. If there's particular areas that you've identified as the cause of staff burnout, send out some surveys around them to figure out what the baseline is in terms of people's feelings about those things, and then figure out if you're making any impact with some of the supports you're putting in place. All right, and I'm going to end with, here at the Hangout Spot, our favorite burnout prevention practices. So I actually spent some time talking to our team members to try to figure out, amongst that here, I've shared with you my wealth of knowledge here today. I've invested deeply in trying to create a business where we work really, really hard on this. And I thought that it was only fair for me to do some self-reflection in sharing, or I should say self-reflection before sharing this information with you, to figure out if my team actually felt any of these things were helpful. And so when I talked with our team, here's the things that they shared that they felt made the biggest impact here at the Hangout Spot. So that interview question I shared with you, and again, welcome you to screenshot it, but that interview question about languages of appreciation in the workplace, that makes a big impact. I can't tell you how many employees we've gotten who probably had other job offers, but because we asked that question, it's indicative of a company culture they want to be a part of, and they choose us instead. And then, taking that into practice. So actually implementing those acts of appreciation, people notice it and they're so personalized. We have one team member who really appreciates quality time. So we schedule monthly team building activities to do together. We have another employee who loves gift giving. So on a really hard week, guess who shows up to work with some little treats for everybody, right? We actually do really frequent check-ins upon onboarding. So, checking in to make sure people are feeling good. If they have any questions, We do quarterly performance reviews so that people get feedback on a really regular basis, but also have the opportunity to share, what is it that they need that we're not giving them? Or what could we change about the onboarding process that would have made it better? Or what could we change about the past quarter that would have made things more successful? Actually, I'm sitting in the room where these things exist, so I can actually show it to you. We have I don't know if you can see it, a compliments jar. And then, I can't reach it because it's across the table, but we also have a complaints jar. And the reason we did this was because in our Friday team meetings, we actually require everybody to show up with one thing to celebrate, but then also one thing that was really frustrating so that we get that, that constant flow of receiving and giving feedback. And then we realized that sometimes we would forget things, right? So they'd happen in the middle of the week in chaos and you just kind of forget it by Friday. So we created a jar and they're all anonymous. We read them out loud, but fun things end up in here. Like there's no more plastic silverware, or there was food all over the microwave, or there's no pen on the temperature check clipboard, right? But then we also have compliments, and that can be such a rewarding experience to read those out loud. And then I've already touched on monthly team events. So ending it here, Megan had great suggestion. I would love to hear, if anybody likes any of these in particular, if any of these resonate with you guys. Raven, I see you there. These prevention practices are great. Wonderful. I'm so glad you like them. But if anybody has any particular feedback on things you've done here that you love and that you would like to share, please feel free to share that in the chat with us. And while we do that, I think that's really the end right there. So I'm actually going to, as people are sharing that, I'm going to just put this on the screen here. You guys, this is our email address and phone number. I can talk all day about these things and I love to share resources. So I am going to figure out how to share these slides with you all. But seriously, if you have questions, if you want a copy of something that I've referenced, please, please, please know I am here for you. I would be happy to talk about this with you. You can email me at this email address, or you can give us a call and I will get you what you need. I'm here to support. I'm happy to have had the past 90 minutes to share with you all, but please know that if you need something, I'm happy to talk to you about it and happy to share resources. In the chat, we got the 5 languages are great. Definitely recommend it for your team. Awesome. Awesome. All right, you guys. Well, I think I went just like 2 minutes over, so I apologize for that, but this was truly a pleasure. I hope that you found this useful. I hope that you found it meaningful. I'm really excited to hear the impact of some of the things you might try. So please do feel free to reach out. And I hope to have the opportunity to continue to collaborate with you all. It's always a pleasure. And then Megan's just reminding everyone, put your name and location in the chat if you haven't already for attendance. All right.